Welcome to this webinar on change management. We live in a fascinating, fast-changing world, which presents a lot of opportunities, but brings challenges as well. And that is, of course, not different for any military organization. So that's why at the Department of Economics, Management and Leadership, we've been doing research on change management for quite some time. And today I want to provide you, together with Captain Van Engel, an overview of all our research activities. Let's start with the need for this research, clarifying why we thought it's so important to focus on change management. I also want to clarify the foundation of our research, and that is the 6 batteries of change model. We'll clarify what exactly is still going on related to research, and we'll provide you some examples of how this work can be important for military units. Of course, we'll end with some conclusions. But let's get into it and clarify, first of all, the need for research.
Since the end of the Berlin Wall 33 years ago, we are living in a VUCA world where volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are keywords of this world today. So volatility, a constantly changing world where even big companies can fail anytime. You've seen this happen a few times the past several months. Uncertainty, black and white swans appear everywhere, big threats and big opportunities to take. So an unknown future, who could have foreseen that we would be in a recession, war and COVID at the same time, for instance? Complexity, everything is changing, everything is interrelated nowadays, which makes complexity as part of the game. If you're doing A, to have an impact on B, you're also influencing C, for instance. So making it simple will not work. You have to embrace complexity to make sense of it. Ambiguity, black or white, makes the decision clear, but we're always advancing in gray. That's just the way it is. So what does this apply? It applies change. We have to apply change. That's the answer to tackle a VUCA world. So we have to think proactively to manage successful change in an uncertain national and international world. Okay, so nice, change is the answer to this VUCA world, so let's do it. But that is where the next challenge kicks in. So the literature is telling us that 70% of all change initiatives fail. Here on the figure, on the left-hand side below, you can see that from the early 80s on, the literature is telling us that 70% of all change initiatives are failing. This is where our research kicks in. How can we increase the success rate of organizations? How can we prepare organizations for their change path? This is where the 6 batteries of change brings illumination.
So in a VUCA world, organizations have to run multiple change initiatives at the same time. But unfortunately, if we look at previous research, organizations are generally not good at this. So that's why, in collaboration with our colleagues Kurt Verweijre and Peter de Prins from Vlerick Business School, we wanted to develop a new model that really could lead to a breakthrough. And that's become the batteries of change model. So we chose a metaphor to support the model that is related to energy. If you want to change something, you have to add energy to it. If we have an object and we want to move it, then my hand is adding energy to it. If I stop adding energy, the object freezes. And that is very often what happens in organizations with change as well. As long as the change receives the right attention, then things move forward. But as soon as we switch to something else, then the other initiative will fall back to a stop. So energy is an important metaphor. That's, like the foundation of the model. And then to develop the model, we worked with different organizations to look at, first of all, what are some of the things that you run into? What are your challenges? What are your pains when you go through change? But we also looked at a number of organizations that have created real success stories. There are several of them that are illustrated in the book, but let me highlight one that I think is easy to understand for everyone. And that relates to Team Sky. So Team Sky is a team of cyclists created by only selecting British riders and that wanted to win the Tour de France within the next 5 years. So that, of course, in a context of a lot of doping scandals, etc., has become quite a challenge, and that's why they really, needed a holistic approach to become successful. So if we look at this Team Sky, then you see that what they needed first of all is a lot of energy from action planning and implementation. You need the right equipment, you need training schedules, you need to exercise, evaluate all these elements. So all that is related to action planning and implementation. All these efforts are measured and then evaluated. So organizations need a powerful management infrastructure to evaluate their success and to prioritize some of their efforts. We need an ambitious top team, a team that has this vision of winning the Tour de France with the British riders within the next 5 years. Something that really inspires people to join that particular team, but that is also essential to really attract the necessary fundings. We need a strong connection with employees. Team Sky was, for example, one of the first teams to appoint individual mental coaches for every single riders. So imagine if you go on these downhill races in the Tour de France and you take a fall. Well, if in the evening you can have this discussion with someone that you trust, that you've built a relationship with throughout the whole year, then it's going to be a lot easier to overcome these obstacles when you have to face the same type of downhill races in the next day. A healthy culture is essential, a culture that wants to win, but clearly also a culture that wants to learn. Because yes, there will be failures. So how do we learn from our failures? And then last but not least, we need a clear strategic direction. So how are we really going to win that particular race? In the case of Team Sky, that is known as their strategy of marginal gains. How can we find 15 areas where we will gain 1% of improvement to beat the dopers? So these kind of elements are just illustrations of 6 main sources of energy, which we call then our batteries of change that we've seen in a lot of organizations. Some of these batteries, as you can see, are rational or more formal. They relate to logic and choices. Others are much more emotional or informal. They relate to individuals, how they sometimes can resist change, and how they have to build informal relationships with the different riders, the different members of their teams to become successful. Some of these batteries are much more operational oriented. That means they really relate to things that need to be changed in order for the riders to perform better. And others are more related to developing the right strategy, so connecting to this changing environment. So I would like you to invite to do a little exercise and to create the batteries of change model yourselves. So in other words, if you look at these different positions from 1 to 6, then which battery would you think fits the position 1? Or which battery would fit, for example, the position number 6? So if you want to take some time to do this exercise, I would like to invite you to pause the video, and then we'll continue in a minute to look at the right solution. Okay. So let's have a look at the solution together. So if we first of all look at the upper left corner, then that's where we will find our clear strategic direction. So obviously that is rational choices. What are the products, the services that our organization wants to deliver? How can we outcompete the competition in this particular area? So clear strategic direction is important. Underneath this particular direction, we need an ambitious top team to really share that strategic direction. So that top team needs to support all the decisions, equally important, related to setting priorities, dividing budgets over different departments. So in other words, the true top team would find opportunities to cut in one department so that we can really invest in areas where we can make a difference. If we look at the right lower corner, that's where we connect with the employees. In other words, change will always be about individuals that have to go through a change pattern. And if we don't connect correctly with them, they might resist the change. So really developing good communication, coaching people when they go through their change curves will be essential in this area. That's an emotional one. If we look at the rational battery on top of this, it's called the action planning and implementation battery. So that's where we will need techniques of process improvement, of project management, to make sure that we identify the right actions and implement them in a correct way. If we look at the center then, from an emotional perspective, what is left is the healthy culture battery. So we want this culture where people want to collaborate, and on a rational counterpart, we find the powerful management infrastructure. That means KPIs, key performance indicators, clear priorities, clear capacity management to really set the goals for our organization. So you might have noticed that I always address these batteries as pairs. And this is important because on each of these different levels of elements of change in an organization, from the left, it's much more, like the strategic top. From the right, it's much more the operational core and the bottom of the organization. And the middle represents very often the middle management section of organizations. Well, for each of these different levels, we need balance. And balance means that, yes, we need positive energy from a rational perspective, but it needs to be supported by the team in this particular level. So ratio and emo need to be in balance. These batteries are also interconnected both from a rational and emotional perspective. So if we go from clear strategic direction, then this strategic direction will help us to identify the right KPIs for our organization, which then will allow us to set priorities, define targets for projects and process improvement. Same thing, if we look at the connection from an emotional perspective, it is the top team, the leaders of this team that need to develop a healthy culture that welcomes the inputs and the engagement of employees. So all the batteries are, in other words, like connected with each other. I illustrated it from left to right. There are even, like connections in between the batteries. A common problem in a lot of organizations at this moment is employees facing burnouts. Well, that's a problem related to the connection with employees' batteries. But part of this problem is created by a lack of priority management in the management infrastructure. So if, in other words, we don't define clear priorities for our employees, then they might be running 7, 8 initiatives in parallel, and that could, of course, like really exhaust them. I hope you will find this an interesting conceptual model that covers, various aspects of change management. The big question now, of course, is it more than just a conceptual model? And that's why we had to develop research to find data to support whether this model could really lead to breakthrough improvements. So that's why we developed a questionnaire. And every battery is split into 5 criteria. So here we're looking at some questions of the ambitious top team battery, and you only see 2 of the 5 criteria. So every criteria by itself is measured by 2 to 4 questions. And so based on the answers on these questions, we are able to determine an energy level. So if we look at the average of this energy level for every battery, you obtain a score between 0 and 5. And if you obtain a score that is bigger than 3, then in fact, it means that there is positive energy for change in that particular battery. So if we look at this illustration, then you can see this organization has positive change from its ambitious top team and seems to have the right connection with employees as well. If you have a score below 2.5, however, then there is negative energy. That means that there are a number of elements that really are resisting the change. So in this case, the powerful management infrastructure clearly seems to be one of the biggest challenges for this organization. And then you have scores between 2.5 and 3. They're color-coded orange, which means that if you look at the criteria, some criteria might be positive, but others, might be negative. So if you want to know how to improve these batteries, you would have to look at the performance of the individual criteria, of course. So now we have what we call an energy profile. What our research demonstrated is that the scores that you obtain on each of these batteries is correlated with change success. So in other words, we ask companies to fill out these battery profiles and referring to transformation project that they have done in the past. And then you can clearly see that if, your energy level increases, your change success rate significantly increases as well. The most stunning results of our research, however, was looking at the profile of different organizations. And what we found is that organizations that have 0 to 2 batteries that are charged, and so let me go back to our illustration, and this is an organization that has 2 batteries that are charged. Well, if that's, your profile, then the companies that we contacted in this particular scenario, well, only 30% of them reported change success. So that seems to align with what in the research is very frequently reported as 70% of the change initiatives fail. If, on the other hand, we look at organizations that have 5 to 6 batteries that are charged, well, these organizations report 95% of change success. So in other words, it's really, charging all your batteries that for organization makes the difference. It's a little bit of a challenge there. You can be really good at strategy, but if you don't connect with your employees, it's not going to work. You can be marvelous at the ambitious top team, but if you don't set the right priorities with your management infrastructure and find the balance within the use of resources, it's not going to work either. So let's have a look at some ongoing research based on this research of the 6 batteries of change.
The first thing is my PhD that I'm currently conducting. It's the extension of the 6 batteries of change to public organizations. And so defense is a particular case of a public organization, of course. And what's the difference, you may ask? Okay, so the difference is that in the public organizations, we're always working in a strict legal framework. On the other hand, we have a bureaucratic structure, and we have a risk-avoidant nature in our organization. And last but not least, we have this stakeholder complexity. It's not always clear who the customer is. We have a lot of stakeholders to satisfy. Another big element is context. So every organization is placed in a different context, which makes it rather complex, because every context is different, and every type of change will also have a different influence on the change dynamics of your organizations. So we have to map these out with a lot of different case studies, and that is where we use our master theses to have this experience to gather the information on all different kinds of organizations. For interventions, we have coaching in several units or projects, for instance, the MQ9B implementation or the cyber component at the moment. And these grant us great opportunities for longitudinal case studies for research. So for change in public organizations, I started with a systematic literature review. So let's see what the literature is telling about change in public organizations. At the left-hand side, you see 21. That's the scoping set. These are seminal works that we really need to capture if you are launching a Boolean phrase to capture literature. So our Boolean phrase, once it captured the 21, it was finalized, and we launched it in the Web of Science database. And this resulted in 1,212 papers. We launched it exclusively in the public administration section. Then we applied a few exclusion criteria. We wanted only to have papers included that were about change on an organizational level in a public organization. That skimmed down the list to 450. And then we did a full paper scan to only take these papers that have regression analysis done with significant results, statistically speaking. 124 papers were withheld at the end, and all these factors that were identified in these papers were plotted on a framework similar to the 6 batteries of change with all the relations that we saw with the regression analysis. This resulted in 936 data points, change success factors, you could say, with 1,009 relationships. So all these factors with the interrelations, we were looking deductively what's the link of the 6 batteries with the literature, and deductively what clusters are coming up with the literature. And this grants us the framework, that's the adopted framework of the 6 batteries of change for the public organization. So these are the 6 batteries of change for the public organizations. Here we see at the left-hand upper side strategy, management infrastructure, and process and project management, for instance. And at the lower side, you see the emotional dimension. A big difference here, for instance, is a top team. There you see aspiration and purpose. So in the normal or in the original 6 batteries of change, we are talking about the vision there. For the public organizations, we see that the literature is talking about public service motivation. So why are people motivated to serve the public at the national level, for instance? Another element at culture is the opportunity seeking and learning culture element. So we saw a lot of literature about these 2 elements, and it is not a coincidence because I started a few slides back about the opportunity seeking that is lacking in public organizations. It appears to be a great element that's linked with innovation and learning as well. And indeed, innovation was also embedded in this research, just in the Napoleon phrase, because innovation is a type of change. This brings us to the context. So we have a lot of context elements. There's a big block of research, and we see that there's a lot of complexity about it. We see relationships of context to type of change, and then we see the influence of this dimension on the change dynamics of the 6 batteries of change. We also saw direct relationships of context with the output element, the change success. So that means, okay, even though if you have 6 full batteries that are green, there's always a percentage that is just determined by context itself. So at the output side, you see a regional element and emotional side, and the people dimension of the outcome. And then on the outcome element, you see the organizational performance. Okay, let's check out a few examples. So here we have done research in 2 different military units, Unit Y and Unit X. And they have quite some differences, so we can compare them here. Unit Y, we see that there are batteries that are a little bit gainer, slightly green, and a few are lacking, so they are draining energy, so orange and red. Change success 2.8, organization performance 2.9. It's not too bad, but the change success of this organization will be moderate. There we can perhaps see the 70-30% of the literature. At the right-hand side, we see something completely different. An organization, and indeed this is a military organization, that has 6 green batteries, and it's generating energy at every level. So you also see the change success, 4, organization performance, or nearly 4, that is fabulous. So what's the difference? Isn't the context always the same for organizations, military organizations? And the answer is obviously no. So, for instance, Unit Y, we see quite some red elements Yeah, at the context side, I would say lack of resources, change history, cynicism for change. Change history and cynicism for change, these are organizational memory elements. That is something that our literature review also come up with quite some recent research about it. Is if an organization had successes in their changes on their previous changes, that's a great predictor for change success in the future as well. So bad experience results in a lesser change success rate. At the right-hand side, we see unit X. This change history and this enthusiasm for change is green. This had quite some positive elements in this organizational memory. Also, lack of resources and external organizations are orange. Not too bad, but still a little bit holding up. So what is the big difference that we saw between these two units? Unit Y was reacting on the change. So they were always waiting if the higher level, the staff level, is imposing or asking a change, and then they would react on the change. And sometimes it resulted in a bad experience. So that's why we see this organizational memory element. It's slightly red. Unit X, for instance, they were always proactively pushing the change. So that means they were always generating new ideas. They were always advancing these ideas to the higher level, to the staff level. And when staff comes up with an initiative, in instance, they were the initiatives that were taken from the unit itself. So you could say that were bottom-up changes. And so people on the work floor are coming up with ideas, and these ideas are transposed to the staff level, and they are actively they are actively withheld and introduced in the unit.
So let's have a look at the illustration provided by the 15th wing. For those of you that are not really familiar with the 15th wing, they provide air transportation within the military. So they're known for previously the C-130 airplanes, and then over the past 2-3 years, they had to transit to the A400M. So that was, of course, a massive transformation. A new kind of capability brings new technology. You need new infrastructure. You need new education and training programs, both for the pilots and the technicians, different types of technology programs, collaboration with industry, etc. So quite a challenge, like if you look at all these different elements. So to start, they did a battery scan, and let's say that they have quite a few batteries that were really draining energy. So they took the batteries of change model as a capstone, then like to really tackle this program from all angles. As I said, they called the project Geronimo. And it's quite a impressive, large, big program, of course, several years. How do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. That means that you have to decompose these big objectives into phases, sub-objectives, KPIs, and then see how eventually you get to the right type of actions that you can tackle in a shorter time frame. If you look at this picture, then clearly you see how it goes from ambition, strategy into setting, like KPIs, priorities, and then eventually managing projects and action planning. The big challenge behind this project, however, comes from making sure that people buy into this approach. So yes, it makes sense from a logical perspective, one bite at a time, but what if I don't like elephant? Or do I really have to eat elephant every day for the next 3 to 4 years, etc.? So in other words, the real challenge is to get everyone hungry and to keep everybody hungry. And that then more relates to the emotional batteries. How can we create a cohesive top team? How can we develop a culture built on strong values that we want to see in this new unit? And then finally, how do we involve our employees? How do we motivate them to get to change? We can't go into detail in the time frame that is allocated to this webinar, but if you're interested, we're of course more than happy to share more details on this particular type of transformation. It is a success story that currently we use as a guiding instrument for other capabilities that are high on the agenda of defense at this moment. So in other words, we're doing a number of other pilot projects where we will use the batteries of change model to really make sure that we introduce these capabilities in a successful way. So that brings us to the conclusions of this session. I hope this webinar provided a good overview of how really, based on the foundation of the 6 batteries, we try to develop new research with our partners from VLERIC, but also from Ghent University, the University of Central Florida, Virginia Tech, and then, of course, the Military Academy, so that we can really understand consequences of change in a public context, in a defense context. Insights of this research is what we also share as part of our education programs at the master level of the Military Academy, of course, also in our 3rd cycle courses. But we do also provide guest lectures at various other universities to share our knowledge in this regard. And then finally, last but not least, I would say we really want to make that knowledge useful for defense as a whole. And that's why we're coaching a number of units, 5 in total, to use the batteries of change model as their real transformation engine, helping them to become successful in change as well. So with this, I would like to thank you for attending this webinar, and I'll be happy to open it up for any additional questions. Thank you.